forward in the days to come and months to come. So this morning we will be talking to one of Nigeria's fans, like I said earlier. We'll be sharing some light on his work and his years of experience of working in the photography industry. So without wasting further time, I want to talk about our uncle here, Babajide Adeniyi-Jones. First, we met him. I met him personally. I'll speak personally first. I met him first when T.Y. Bello spoke about him some years ago. And I decided to make some research to find out who this person was. And to my greatest amazement, I saw incredible works that this man has put his energy, resources, and time to make sure it happens. So this morning, I would like him to introduce himself. It's better he does that in the way that pleases him. So we don't go and overhype, and go beyond bounds. So, sir, I would like you to briefly introduce yourself to everyone in the house, and let us begin the conversation from there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Babajide Adeniyi-Jones. I'm a photographer, I've practiced, as you say, for several years in different areas of photography. But the longest I've been, and the one that I think everything else drew me towards, was a sort of a practice of documenting and recording how we live at this particular point in time in whatever part of the world I am at the time. I'll just sort of at the outset say that I think that one of the main values of somebody's experience to somebody who is less experienced is to know and to be aware of pitfalls, but not to be encumbered by that person's experience, and not to be held back, especially when the experiences are negative. Just in thinking about, talking to who I assume are much younger photographers than myself, I thought that there was a little story that I would tell to begin, which I think is an important backdrop to everything that I may say. And it is that I think it's a wonderful time right now to be somebody trying to find their way in this kind of work in Nigeria. It's a difficult time throughout the world because the way this sort of images and information is consumed is different from what it was 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But it's a wonderful time because the internet and the realization and appreciation from pressure from various people of other points of view is at a much higher level than it was. And I'll give you a little story. I had been working for several years in Lagos, and or in Nigeria, and I remember visiting the United States at a time when I thought that National Geographic was sort of the pinnacle of where one wanted to have their work shown. And so I arrived, and I was in Washington, which is where National Geographic is based. And I had a couple of months before done some work in Osogbo. Now, with hindsight, I was really pleased with this work, but with hindsight, my approach to work was an awkward fit in a place like National Geographic. But the interesting story that I want to tell is that I picked up the telephone and I found their number and I called. And I asked to be put through to the photographic department. And I told the person who I spoke to, who said they were a deputy photo editor, that I was from Nigeria, I was in town, I had these images, and I'd like an opportunity to show them. Now, this is in no way, a comment on how good or bad or terrible the images were, but the guy's reply to me was that we know the best photographers in the world and we call them thank you. Now, what I thought was fascinating about that is that today, that would never happen. No matter how bad your work is, somebody will want to see it because there's another point of view that's being brought forward. So from that point of view, I think it's a wonderful time to be a photographer. And I tell the story, as I said before, because it's something to know, because these kinds of things manifest in different ways, but it is not something to be a stumbling block to make somebody say, oh, no, I won't bother, they won't, because the times have changed. The times have changed fundamentally, the ground has shifted. And in fact, people are looking out for your point of view, your ideas. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that you have to have your antenna about you, because there are other ways in which ideas of superiority will manifest. And so I think it's, so yes, so this is my introduction.
Wow, thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't want to just babble on without some interaction and or take it in a different direction or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for that introduction. One of the things that I heard from what you said is that we are more about us learning from your experiences, your pitfalls, your mistakes, that we do not repeat such mistakes, or we make it better and become better photographers. And the second thing I heard was the issue of point of view, that people's point of view about situations differ, like the editor you spoke about, saying that they know the best of the best photographers in the world. That is hitting really hard. But I'm really happy, like you said, the times have changed and the dynamics have changed. I don't think anyone would go in that light to say they wouldn't even want to see what you've done or what you haven't done. So this change in seasons, I think let us begin it from there. We observed that in your time in the 60s and to the 80s, most of the photographers who worked in that season or in that era were mainly working either for the newspapers or for the magazines. Unlike our time, where most photographers, let me not use most, many photographers are drawn to photography either from the event making or money making venture, or from the stardom they could attain from being superstars on social media, something like that. Some photographers are like, not everyone. So what is your take? Do you think this is impacting on the kind of work that we are doling out or we are creating on a daily basis from your time?
I think that if you were a photographer, sort of working in the 70s, 80s, 60s, or whatever. Now, I don't imagine that you are making a very good living. The people who were able to make something of a living were the people who were working in advertising, because the fledgling advertising industry was coming together, and so there were some photographers who were being able to make a fairly reasonable living at the time in that way. But I don't think that you had people who were, generally working in newspapers making a good living. It was difficult, and it was very, it was doubly difficult for the photographer working, let's say, in the newspapers, because there's a hierarchy of information consumption. And in Nigeria, the newspapers were driven by the written word. And so the idea of images being an integral part of communicating what you're doing didn't really exist. So what you would have is you'd have pictures put in the papers in order to break up the monotony of text, so that the classic thing is somebody's doing a story on a burglary. And so you put a picture of the Inspector General of Police in the middle, so you break up the text and it. But that does nothing to augment the story that's being told. So for a long time, that was the case. I think that in the 50s, I know of the late Lateef Olayinka, who was working in a newspaper in Ibadan. And the then Sunday Times editor, Oliver Jackman, saw a picture of his and asked people to find out who that guy was and bring him. And he gave him a job, and he ended up with a career in the Daily Times. And so Lateef Olayinka, Peter Obey, these were guys who, by themselves, with their own vision, forced the inclusion of more interesting images into the newspapers. But even as late as when I was working in The Guardian, I worked for the African Guardian, which is a magazine, which was a sister publication to the newspaper. The tyranny of the sub-editors kept photographers from growing or expressing themselves, so that you would have maybe one page and they'll say, oh, this is Photo Speak or Sunday Photo or blah, blah, blah. But the idea that at an editorial meeting, you would have somebody with some visual literacy to come up with an input to what was going on, or to how the story was being told, was very rare. I mean, for me, it happened that the people who had asked me to join were interested enough in what I thought, what I said, for me to be part of those things. But a very interesting story for me. There's a photographer who worked in The Guardian. He worked on the Daily, and we went. A lot of people have spoken about pictures I posted of Anini's execution. But the interesting thing is we used to go every other week down to Benin during the trial, et cetera, et cetera. And so on the day that it was announced they were going to be executed, we had to fly out to Benin that night, spend the night. Next morning we went, and I was racking my brains as to how to photograph this event and in what way I could capture what was going on. And of course, it's the end of an era. It's the end of something that had caught the whole nation's imagination. So that's what I was trying to get in my mind, what to do. So anyway, we did the photographs. It was the traumatic experience it was for everybody. And we came back to Lagos, and I was processing film that night. And the sub-editors sent me a message that could I come? They're looking for a good picture for the front page, that they're not happy with any of the pictures that they got from Monday, who was the photographer who had gone with me. So I had a couple of pictures that I think were pretty much the same as his, of just somebody tied to the stake or whatever. So I went downstairs with them anyway. And the way it used to work was there's a sub-editor's desk, and they're working at quite a frenetic pace. And so when pictures are put on their table, they would sort of, if they don't like this one, they just flick it off onto the ground. So by the sub-editor's desk, there were all these photographs. And I remember coming and looking at the photographs on the floor and freezing, because Monday, for most of the day, had turned his camera on the crowd. he had photographs of people looking, coming to see, drooling, holding up their children to see. It was the most profound comment on what was going on that I could imagine. And with all my assumed understanding and knowledge of it completely eluded me. And then here I was with the gatekeepers of the thing who have just dismissed this as nonsense. So it certainly was not a high point, a romantic era of glorious era of photography, and people who battled their way through it did so because of their own vision, because of their own determination to present things the way that they felt them and they saw them. And so I think that the next sort of, when photography started becoming, the idea of the younger, I was listening to a talk on Instagram yesterday, and there was some photographers talking about how difficult it was for them coming up, and how the examples of humanistic work that they saw was from the Western gaze, and they brought this idea of which they all felt was demeaning to the people in Africa, and but those were the examples they saw of how work was. But because I came from an era a little bit before that, the kind of people whose work I looked at were not the agency photographers, was not the people who were successful in publishing. There were a lot of South American photographers. If anybody was interested, there's a work of people like Pedro Maya from Mexico. There's the Peruvian Martin Chambi, who worked in sort of throughout the 20th century. He died in 88 or something like that. But his early work was profound influence on me, and people who were looking at work in the press and what they called, the Western photographers' gaze, I think were probably missed a lot. I mean, one of the most profound, life-changing or word-changing books that I saw that turned my head inside out was the work of Gilles Perez, a thing called TellThatStory. This book is not in print now, but I think you can even see bits of it on the internet. How you can approach a subject from a completely different point of view. And this is what gave me an interest in long-term photographic assignments. One of the photographers who has had, when I say a photographer has had a big influence on me, it doesn't mean that I take pictures like they do, but it's influenced my approach to work and my idea of what's of value. There's a Mexican, Graciela Iturbide. She has done these slow, long-term assignments and has produced some. I was lucky last year, just at the end of the lockdown, there was a large exhibition of her work on in Washington, DC, and I was there and I was able to go and see it. I'd never seen her prints. I'd never, I have a book of hers and I'd seen her work, but it was a wonderful experience to go and see the sort of culmination of that kind of commitment to the way, commitment to the way you work and respect for who you're photographing. In this talk I heard yesterday, I heard, people were talking about ethics of photography and what's the main thing. And I think empathy and good manners are the important things in approaching a subject when you're doing empathy, in that there are many things that will not go wrong if you think of how you would feel about it. And good manners is understanding that holding a camera everybody talks about the power. It gives you nothing. It's an intrusive instrument that anybody has the right to say, take that nonsense away from me. So good manners entails, I think, respecting who you're dealing with. And so your approach, and it's amazing how, because in a place like Nigeria, there is not a history of photography being used in any way that benefits the person who's being photographed. And so any kind of hostility, and it used to be much greater, but any kind of hostility, I think, is natural and normal. But it's amazing how easily that can be overcome because people understand sincerity in a person. And so it comes down to also your humanity as a photographer. And I remember listening to a talk, a panel discussion of some photographers in Lagos a few years ago, bemoaning the difficulties of getting access to things they want to photograph. And one of them was saying, yes, and it's so unfair because, you know, photographers from outside can come in and they have deep pockets so they can pay to get access and do what they want. And I thought it was very, it was fascinating hearing that, because if your purpose is to get something that you already know, then you can pay somebody to show you what you know and you get it and you go away. If you want to understand something, then getting whoever, wherever the people you're going to photograph, understanding and buying into what you're doing will reveal to you things you could never have imagined about what you thought you knew. Can
you say that again? Talking about understanding.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you can rephrase it because I'm trying. That part seemed very interesting. Can you say that again? Talking about.
Well, that's interesting as it's.
Yeah.
Let me. Okay, I was talking about how people were complaining about not having the resources to buy access. And so my point is that buying access presupposes that you know what you want and you're going to pay for it. So you know how people live in a certain way. So you pay somebody and they allow you to, what is it you want? Oh, I'd like somebody to do it, and you're able to do it. However, because you're not part of that, it is more than likely that there's so much more that goes into what you see that you don't understand, that once you can let the people who you're interacting with understand your motives and buy into your motives, then you find people saying, no, look, this is how, this comes before this is how things work. And you can get a much, 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 much deeper understanding. And this sort of brings me to a little word that irritates me when I hear photographers talking about a fixer and saying, oh, you can't do it without a fixer, you need a fixer. It's really, I know it's just semantic, it's silly for me to, but I find it such a denigrating word. It's somebody who does your translation and shows you this. Well, the person who you call a fixer actually could be, if you really want to do your work well, could be a collaborator in realizing what you want, because your fixer will be somebody from that place. And when you just need him to translate and say, okay, this is what I've come for, this is what I want, it's a different from a collaborator where you go to this person and you say, yeah, you know, you're from this place, this is what I'm trying to do. Tell me about this. How does this go? And the role is far more profound than the role we have taken on from the guy who flies in not knowing anything and just needs somebody to translate from it. So for you working, and for me, if I work in Nigeria, many times I work in areas where I don't speak the language and I have to work with somebody. They are never a fixer. They're all, and I always acknowledge who has been able to make me understand and learn. And even when I'm working in other parts of the world, exactly the same thing applies, because I think these collaborations can be enriched if we, well, let me say, depending on what your ultimate objective is, depending on what you're trying to do with your work. Yeah.
So now this is what we're talking about, experience. What you just told us now did not come from yesterday or today. It came from some years of experience. So
Something will take us another 10 years to figure it out.
yeah, so that's what we're talking about. So you mentioned a lot of stuff while you were talking, and I really want us to look at some of them. Edgar, please do you have some things to look down to?
Yeah, that the part about empathy and good manners, I've heard that before. Surprisingly, it came to me differently today. What else do I have here? You talked about the tyranny of sub-editors.
How did you overcome that?
No, I don't think I didn't overcome it. I mean, because for me, it was a little bit different, because the magazine that I worked on, I was also the picture editor. So I had a little bit more influence than I could, but still it wasn't because there were instances where I was heavily overruled by the managing editor, the editor, the people who were one example that comes to mind is we did a story. We had a meeting, editorial meeting, discuss stories, and we're going to do a story on prostitution. And so everybody was, that meeting was full of sort of young 40s, 30s-year-old men who came up with the approach to a story on prostitution. And a couple of, maybe a year before, a cousin of mine who's a doctor had been doing work in Uganda, and he came to Nigeria. This was during the Babajide administration, and how he saw HIV had decimated Uganda. He thought that really severe actions should be taken, serious actions should be taken to try and limit this in Nigeria. So he came up against a brick wall. He didn't get much traction, but he had loads and loads and loads and loads of boxes of condoms. And he asked me if, okay, since he's not making much progress, in the evenings, let's just drive around and distribute condoms to the ladies on the street and have a little talk with them and tell them, look, this is for your group. So I had the experience of driving up to what looks like a hard, the picture that you have of that we project of prostitution, a hard-looking woman, and she's all painted up, and she's a temptress or whatever nonsense. And you would call the lady to come to the car, and she would come, and she would, her first reply is harsh and hard. And then you explain that you're actually not asking for anything from her. You're offering her something that is for her own good and is not costing her anything. And within minutes, before your eyes, this person transforms to a vulnerable young girl by the side of the road, the victim of I say victim because actually this is one of the few situations where I think it's a victim, because it's a victim of a society that functions in a particular way. And so I was quite strong and vocal in my position on how we should approach this story. There were more people than me with perhaps even subconscious, deeper insecurities themselves, for whom the only way to approach this is of these terrible women, loose women doing this, and I even try to argue, just look at it from supply and demand. If there's nobody coming to tell you get into my car, they won't be standing outside there.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, this is a long way around saying, how did I overcome this? At the end of the day, I don't think that I did. Our story certainly didn't have the kind of images that everybody was expecting. But it's these things are ongoing battles, and they manifest in different ways. The way somebody's, early in their career now will deal with not possible with anything, all of these stereotypes and prejudices is for each person to decide. But I think the important thing to do is to think, what am I here doing? I asked in the meeting, are we here to reinforce prejudices and stereotypes? Or are we here to produce something not to change anybody's mind, but that could make somebody say, oh, I've not looked at it that way before. Oh, perhaps there's another way to look at it. So yes, in short answer, I don't think that I've overcome anything, but I think that it's a continuous.
Just to follow up on that, technology has made publishing quite easy. Do you think that it has opened the gate and now we have a flood of images and it has reduced the impact images are supposed to have in society or in changing narratives?
I don't think that images are supposed to have any impact at all. There's no supposed to have. I know that during the Vietnam War, there were a lot of really committed photographers who, one of whom I really, Philip Jones Griffiths, he did a fantastic, in my mind, book called Agent Orange, which was actually photographed after the war. So, but he was in Vietnam during the war. A lot of photographers who worked for the agencies, et cetera, said that photography brings such power with it that if we can let people see what this really is about, they won't tolerate it. They will not allow their politicians to do this if they could see. So what happened was a lot of photographers and editors went about trying to bring the reality of war into people's living rooms. But because we're all human beings, and because we have to get through the day, we have coping mechanisms. And so by the time there's a newsreel of the Tet Offensive, in people's minds, to differentiate that from a realistic war movie of John Wayne storming the bridges, they merge. And so at the end of the day, people could eat their dinner with the news going on, with all of those horrific things going on. So it brings people to the challenge of the power of the image. By being too graphic, do you lose the power? Because people will not just go insane because they can't cope with what actually is going on. Parts of them will turn off, they won't look at it. And so I think the challenge of maintaining some kind of relevance with your image, with the power of imagery in that way, has to do with your approach, with how you, and it's not necessarily, sometimes, in my mind, the more subtle, the more eloquent your approach. So a lot of the Japanese photographers whose work I like very, very much, take a much less sort of straightforward and in your face look. So we had a big argument. Another picture I put on Instagram lately was from the day that Dele Giwa was killed. And I think that we had a big argument as to whether, because the paper doesn't show graphic pictures like that. We don't publish dead people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a school of thought that what has happened within this society is so fundamental. People have to see and understand. At the end of the day, no sort of graphic pictures of, there was a guy called Sam Olusegun who did a photograph which was almost abstract, which I think, sort of brought it home that something really unacceptable had happened, but it wasn't. And then I was drawn to by one of the Japanese photographers whose work I liked so much, in the room there with when he was dead. I thought, what can I do that will, an image that will have power? And so I took a photograph of, I saw on the windowsill his watch, which of course had stopped the instant of the blast. And so in the end, that was so, we can sit down and say, oh, how the power images should have. They do have immense power. The first pictures of atrocities in Vietnam had tremendous power. People couldn't believe, you see somebody, executing somebody in the street. But that is not a formula. It will not endure. It will not, people will have to find a way of coping with things that look strong. And so there are different ways that each person has to work out to find, to give power in a direct or indirect way to the images that they make.
That is really, that answers the question. And I like the way you either tell a story or you give a framework to answer your questions, and it really opens up our understanding of some of these things. One, you're talking about how to maintain that power, or the power that an image has. Talking about the approach you take to documenting is what gives it power or reduces its power. And you said, in your own point of view, you have seen that the more subtle and more an image is, it gives it more eloquence or something like that. I hope I got it right. So coming from this line.
By the way, I'm not saying that that's the way to do it.
Yes, you said yes.
Because
you said in your point of view.
There's far more ability, perhaps, to deal with something head on and for it to carry that power and emotion. So there's in no way I'm saying, oh, that's the right way or that's the wrong way. And if, sorry, before you go on, it just reminded me, I do a lot of, I used to do a lot of judging for the East African Photographers Association. And then, we moved on to online judging. And before, we used to judge in person, and then they would have contestants who would come and have portfolio reviews, and we would talk to them, and each person is good. But when it moved online, they decided to have a section where each judge could comment on the photographs, and each judge could see everybody else's comment. And I had, at that time, I had some technical difficulties with being able to log on. So it was very late. It was just before the deadline that I was able to log on and look at all the work. But so that by then, all the other judges' comments were there for me to see. And what struck me, and the comment I made about it, was that a lot of the judges I mean, excellent, eminent, great photographers and people who deal with images every day and who have a good understanding, et cetera, would make comments like, this should have been done like this, or if you had done this, it would have been a better image. Now, I am viscerally opposed to that, because if you are somebody who has no experience, a teacher or whatever, I think your responsibility is to get down to the fundamentals and say to the person who has put that picture, rather than your composition, if it had included this would be better, it's, did you exclude this deliberately? Look and be deliberate about what you do, because what you're trying to do may have necessitated what you've done, which I have missed. And so it's this idea of, somebody with, and if that had been followed, 90% of the innovative work that we've seen, we never have seen. If everybody has to follow the way it's supposed to be. Now, the way it's supposed to, I was having a discussion with somebody the other day who, the famous Robert Capa quote for, combat photographers or war photographers, that if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. I have always interpreted that not to necessarily, it may sometimes, but not to necessarily mean a physical closeness. It means an understanding. Your pictures are not good enough if you don't have if you're not close enough to the subject in terms of understanding the subject. Because there are many things that physical proximity does not give extra power to, but the understanding, the sort of, maybe I'd say emotional proximity is crucial all the time. Sorry, I interrupted you and went off on a tangent, so let's go.
No, you are perfectly in order. Just trying to observe from the conversation, I'm seeing your point of view, how you look at images or how you think images should be looked at. And I am of the opinion, because I like your school of thought, because really, like you talked about the sub-editors, just doling out or throwing pictures on the ground that if they feel didn't cut the match or didn't make the mark or cannot be used. And you're now talking about being in a judge's position and really looking at the images and interrogating the images, rather than just saying, you should have done this in this direction, you should have used this kind of framing, you should have used this kind of, you could have included X, Y, Z. Now, coming from this kind of understanding, how do you then look at an image and say, for example, this image, for example, I'm doing a story, I'm creating images for a cultural ceremony that is losing its essence, maybe like the Benin Igwe Festival, for example. And I'm documenting Igwe Festival for some people who might have seen Igwe Festival before or might not have seen Igwe Festival before. How do you think, or what would be, if you were to be a judge to look at the kind of images I would create, what would be the criteria? What are the things that you will look into to say that image cuts it or describes that ceremony? What are the things that you look into in an image to say this image cuts it or this image does not cut it?
Of course, I can't tell you anything specifically because I'm not close enough to what you're talking about. But I think that you who is creating the images, I think your responsibility is to get as much of an understanding as you can about what are the important parts or the parts that are peripheral but that impact on the main thing, and do those images. Because it's not always so straightforward. Somebody may say, somebody who is part of the festival knows what's important, so they can look at your images and say, yes, this is what's good or right. But I think that the fact that it's you who's doing that means that you have to rely on your understanding, and your understanding is based on so much about your own existence and your own life, but it's also based on the level of empathy that you have, the level of your ability to listen to somebody and respect for what you're doing. And so I think it's a difficult, with something you're not familiar with. It's always difficult, and it requires time, but you have people who will aid you once they understand what you're trying to do. People from within the festival. So if somebody says to you, go and photograph this festival, it's taking place at such and such a time, go there and do the pictures. And you don't know much, it becomes because some of the most telling images may take place the night before, may take place a week before. How things that are being done that prepare for it. And that's where I think it's this closeness to the subject to make your pictures good becomes important. I don't know. I don't feel I've been very helpful, but then the answers I don't have.
Yeah. So you're hitting the nail on the head, because now, even if you ask some other things, you always try to make sure you portray the fact and you give a clear picture of what you're trying to see. And from what you've been trying to say, we've heard two things reoccurring: empathy, good manners. Empathy, good manners. And the third thing, understanding the subject you are trying to document or photograph. So those two things, these three things I think they are the most, to me, some of the most important things that every photographer should always consider before making any image. Empathy, like you said, how you feel about it, putting yourself in the shoes of that person or the subject or whatever, and having good manners. Are you talking about this camera being an intrusive tool? Now, I went some days to, I had an issue with my phone. So I went to the shop to try and get another phone. And what the people who were marketing the phone were all talking about, they weren't talking about the system of the phone or the operating system of the phone. All they were concerned about was the camera, how good the camera was, how good the selfie camera is, how good the back camera is. And I realized that these guys are just selling or making markets off camera sales rather than the phone technology itself. So do you think this new trend that is happening that gives everybody the access to this intrusive tool is going to have any impact, or is having impact on our photography today?
Yeah, it certainly does. It does have a tremendous impact. I think the first thing that it's had a tremendous impact is the picture processing industry, where you had so many places where you could go take pictures, have them processed, and then if you happen to have a camera with you, but suddenly you have your camera with you wherever you go. You can photograph whatever you want. There are people who have found themselves through camera phones. I started taking pictures of things I liked, and somebody looked at it and said, "Oh, these are great," or "Why don't you get into it?" And have found, some latent talents or interests within themselves. So I think that the fact of having, people say, "Oh, it's terrible. Everybody has a camera now. What about photographers?" Well, I think that the best thing about it is that the net is very wide, so that there are people who would have been scared off from image making by all of the paraphernalia around it, who have a wonderful, powerful vision, who can now be led gently into understanding that. And I think that if you're a photographer, you know that, being at a wedding and being able to take a nice selfie of your friends is not the same thing as having a photographer. And the wedding photography business around the world, and there's some Nigerians who are on the cutting edge of a completely different paradigm around wedding photography. I remember years ago, I used to feel that, if you do a wedding, the important thing is to try and create images for a couple that if you substituted the faces, it couldn't be anybody else's wedding. So when you just have the people standing, bride and groom, if you substitute, but now you have people approaching wedding photography in a way that is just so thoughtful, innovative, responding to, and many of them, when you hear, you talk to them, you hear the most important thing about my wedding is the interview with the couple beforehand, because that's what now gives you a sense of who they are, of what you're going to do, of how you're going to approach it. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing that there's, and that the cameras have. The first time I did work with a digital camera, it was a 5 megapixel digital camera. And the interesting thing is that, I made nice prints from it, prints that I like and look at today. And now my phone is many multiples of what that camera sensor was. But it's the transition. It's interesting because I came into photography with analog photography, and by the time digital photography was gaining a foothold, I felt that I had pretty well mastered my medium. I knew how to get what I wanted. I knew what to do with my films, my processing and printing. So at that time I went and I was spending some time in America. And a friend of mine was changing his whole workflow from analog to digital. He was digitizing the whole thing and getting rid of all his analog stuff. And I remember having long discussions, long into the night, about the merits of one over the other and how, digital photography is not just this, it's analog. And then I was going to Opobo to go and photograph the coronation of the new Amani, or who had coronated after a 20-year struggle for the seat. Yeah. But I was in America and I was going, so I thought, now I'm going to buy 200 rolls of film and I'm going to have them scanned. I'm going to have them scanned at one airport. When I change planes, they're scanned again. And everybody's telling me what the film, et cetera, et cetera. And my elder brother, who lived in London, I was going through London, had bought this, because he's always on the cutting edge. He bought this digital camera. So I said, I'm going to take it. And luckily it was a self-assigned project. So it wasn't, it would have cost, at the end of the day, it would cost something, but I wouldn't have been disappointing a client or something. So I decided to go off with this camera to Opobo. Now, not having worked with digital camera before, I certainly wasn't, looking at after every image to see what I got or anything like that. But every evening, I was able to look through the pictures and see where I was in the story in a way that I never was able to do before. And before, it would have been when I was back and then the things had been processed and there were contact sheets that I would first see what I'd done. And I thought that was a definite advantage. And then on the plane going back, I sat there and I thought, you know what? When people moved from using plate cameras to using 35mm cameras, somebody said this quality is not good enough, this is not good. And then you can choose to stay there and become the grumpy old who says things are not the way they used to be. Or when they now move to 120 film, from 120 to 35mm, or from black and white to color. No serious photographer uses color film. Black and white is serious work until people are coming up and mind-blowing stuff. So it's a choice that you make. And I said to myself, now, all of my discussions were from ignorance. I am taught a development that I really know nothing about. I'm just talking because I know about the analog work. And so embracing what's new gives you the opportunity to say, oh, for this I prefer this, for this one I prefer this. And the worst thing about it all was that, and I'm gonna throw out a racial stereotype, which I am, but the worst thing is that when you complain about the quality of a digital photograph, there's a Japanese guy who doesn't sleep that night and in the morning it's better. The quality has improved. So your argument today doesn't last very long. Progress goes on, and what is needed, when quality is needed, the quality improves. And so I have analog. The main reason why I think over the last 5 years, I've not even picked it up is because analog film is so expensive now to lay your hands on. And of course, nobody who I work for wants anything that's analog. And except for if I were drawn to some particular kind of specific artistic representation of what I'm doing, for most of the work I do, the digital work is fine. And also, it's become fine for me in another way also, because I used to be obsessed with composition, with how the balance of an image and I used to be able to take a photograph of something and all I'm happy about is how it's composed, it's how it makes you, it's a sweet, beautiful image. Well, over the years, I've reached the stage where all of those sorts of things are completely irrelevant to me. The only thing that's important is the extent to which your image conveys what you're trying to say. And it may be that it is, and it is more often than not, it is within that composition that you achieve that. But I think it was good practice for me, but it has long since ceased to be an objective. It's one of a number of tools that you need. And I think that the important thing is that if you can do it well, then like if you're writing, to convey ideas, the more eloquently you write, the more easy it is for the person to understand what you're saying. And I think the same thing applies to image making.
Yeah, thank you for that. What happened? Did you mute? Uncle, you're muted.
Sorry?
Okay, yeah.
Me? No, I didn't touch my, no, it's not muted on this side.
Okay, fine, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes, so sorry for the internet cut. We were talking about how writing more often makes, how did you put it just now? Talking about writing anyway. So we also realized that you are a good writer. So where is the place of writing in photography, or where is the place of photography in writing? You earlier mentioned in the early 70s, 80s that photographs were just to complement write-ups in the newspaper and stuff like that. So what is your take on writing and photography? Is there a place where they sync? Is there a place of convergence for both writing and photography? how important is that to the work?
I think I answered that question by saying, well, how important is painting or music? I think it's all the same thing. When you're trying to communicate something, you use the tools that you have. I know that with photography, often it's important to provide context within which to look at the picture. I think that I mean, if you're explaining your picture, then, you know, I don't know, why did you take the picture? But I think that sometimes you and that's where captioning comes in. Sometimes people provide a context within which to understand the image. And you know, these things sometimes, I remember you mentioned TY at the beginning, and I remember earlier on in her career, I remember somebody who I think should have known better saying to her, well, you know, you have to decide, are you a musician or a photographer? You know, you can't be both. You've got to decide and face the one you're going to face. And I remember thinking, you're a creative person, and whichever outlet you can use. Gordon Parks, he's an African-American, really eminent photographer. But, you know, he was a concert level piano player. He was he made movies, he painted. I mean, if you're a creative person and your juices keep flowing in one direction and there's one way, that you're fine. And if there are other ways, fine. And so I don't really think that this business about, you know, which one, where do they meet? They're all part of the same,
system, creative system.
Journey that we're on. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Uncle. So to take this further, the issue of compartmentalization or specialization, realize from your stories you've churned out on Instagram, for example, you've documented people like Fela, although he's a political figure, but he's also a musician. You documented stories around Dele Giwa, documented stories around Anini. You're also doing some conceptual imagery, like this, the ones with the girl wearing the baby cloth on the street, stuff like that. So what's your idea on people taking an area to say they are a specialist in this area? Like, what's your take on that? Is it something that photographers should look inward, specializing, or just be a photographer, be a creative person?
I think that it's really fantastic and important to specialize in one thing if that's what you're drawn to specialize in. And if your interests are varied, then it's important to. Now, this may not be good advice, financial advice, because maybe to be really financially successful, you know, you have to do this or that. I don't know. But where I think that I can be of help far more than is the advice I would give is you move in the direction that you're drawn. We are all different, and we are all more than one thing. We are all, there's not just one talent we have or one way in which, and perhaps even the gift you have is the ability to go deep into the one thing. And so in that case, that's what you should do. I don't think that it's anything that anybody can say as a broad sweeping, oh no, photographers should all be doing one thing or another.
Thank you very much. That's good. Go ahead.
There's a story I thought of, which sort of is. There's a photographer who, in the early days, I was living in London, and I met an Australian photographer who had come. He was a still life photographer, and he had felt that he was limited by the market in Australia, and he wanted to come to London, which was a photographic center, and he wanted to come and start his career there. He had a hobby of scuba diving. He used to go off the beautiful reefs in Australia. And even though still life was his work, he would always dive with a camera. And he would look for interesting coral arrangements, things that he could see. One day this thing may be, somebody may want something like this. And so he photographed many, many of them. And he came to London with everything. So he was struggling, like we all were at the time, trying to see how we could work in various practices.
Yeah.
And then the movie Jaws came out. And when Jaws came out, there were encyclopedias, comics, books. Everybody was looking for an image of a shark, any kind of shark. Sharks were what? This guy said every time, twice a week he dived, he saw some shark or other, but you see them every day. He never took a picture of one.
Wow.
And he said, I would have picked up my photography business and lived off my royalties if I had been photographing those sharks. Wow. And for me, it was quite a good lesson that the familiar, because he was so familiar with them, he could probably have photographed them better than anybody people who went out today to go and try and photograph a shark because there's a need for it. So that's, I thought, was something I wanted to share in terms of when you, oh God, what should I do? There's always something to do. There's always something to do. And there are things that are very close to you that you have no idea when they will take on, or projects that you decide, okay, his big success with his hair. I was fortunate. I mean, I knew him for a long time, but I was fortunate to be asked to do an interview with him for the book, the monograph that CCA did on him. And he told me that when he did the long story about how he started and photographing hair, and that there was a time when Mrs. Ojekere asked him, all these photographs that nobody asked you to take, why are you taking these? What is this for? At least the 2 naira or what that you waste on the film, what is it for? And he said he couldn't answer. Then he walked his book around looking for publishers and this and that and the other. And people were not, academic people would say, oh, I can use this to illustrate, I can do some research on this. And he, this was this. So eventually, he got the success that he did. And the first big show, well, we're selling a ticket for you. Do you want an assistant to come along? And he said, yes, his son, Amaise, should come along. And he says, and I need another ticket for my wife. And they did. And he said, because I had to answer that question that I had no answer for all of these years. And he said she was just looking at the people who came. And so that finally is the answer to why he was doing all of that, which he couldn't have told you because he didn't know, but he knew he had to do it.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's not to say that everybody will, do whatever you want, but it is to say, follow whatever your inclination is, and in doing that, actually, the value of what you produce may not even be realized while you're around. But if you're following if you're doing something you have to do, then do it. Don't worry. The actual adulation is a satisfaction of the ego, which really, if you're talking about people who talk about, oh, the way your country is seen, the way, those are things, if that's what drives you, then do the work anyway. And the other thing is, I feel, because I've spoken to people over the years who say, yeah, especially in documentary or press, yeah, I want to show white people that we are this. Look, there's nothing you have to prove to anybody. And it is a complete distraction from you following your own work. Because nobody, with all of this superior inferiority, the originators of all this don't believe that anybody is superior or inferior to anybody. It's a distraction so that you are busy proving something that you don't have to prove and not getting on with what you are called to do during your time on this earth.
That is so profound. That's so profound.
Okay, let me quickly acknowledge where it came from before people start thinking I'm so profound. So I listened to an interview with Toni Morrison.
I like your honesty.
You're a really honest man.
Talking about racism in America, and she said that nobody ever believed the Black person was inferior or subhuman. You don't make nannies of subhuman people. They always never thought that Black people were lazy because all the work was done by Black. All they hoped was that Black people would imbibe that and feel they were unable to do this or that or the other. So that's the origin of what I just said, which is far more, I think, deep and profound. But it's something I'm willing to that we can all share and all benefit from. There's a distraction that's put about in many ways that you have to get out of your head and concentrate on what you're called to do.
That is. Thank you very much for your honesty. And like we all know, some of us might never be privileged to read some books, but we'll be privileged to read those books from people who have read those books. Yeah. Like you mentioned some books like the TEDx Iran, if I got it right.
Yeah.
That might not be in the print anymore, but we are privileged to hear about such books because you mentioned it. We can now go and do some research based on what you just talked about. So I like that you credited where you got it from, but I'm also happy that we could read such books, at least a line or two from what you have said. Someone asked a question in the chat box. Can you scroll down and see? Yeah, and said, I find the practice of printing hard to master on the continent and printing lasting work. How did you overcome this issue of printing in the new digital age? Do you still process your films?
Okay, he said he finds the what?
Yeah, printing. I think it's talking about printing from film, printing from film, black and white.
Okay.
Yeah, well, he said anything to print archival work, archival inks, archival prints.
Okay. For me, the way to do it would be to scan the negatives, and then technology allows you to make really good digital prints from your negatives. And I know people who are working today solely, particularly people who are what you would call art photographers, who are working solely with negatives, and they are having them scanned and then high resolution digital prints made from the scans from those negatives. And the technology moves so it just relentlessly marches on, and it's marching on to satisfy where there's a need. And so, for example, it may be a little bit expensive scanning your negatives because there are not that many people who do that. But the technology is there.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I mean, I don't I've since I stopped printing with an enlarger, I have never made a print myself. Every print that I've had has been made by somebody who's very good with computers and who that's the line that they have chosen. I know photographers who are excellent at doing digital printing, but I'm not one of them.
Thank you, sir. Luca Levy, your hands are up. You want to ask a question? Levy, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Heard. I have no idea why my hand is up, and that was an accident.
All right, okay, thank you.
All right, can you put it down for me? Because I also don't know how to do that.
Okay, fine, I'll put it down for you now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Francis?
Sorry. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah,
Okay. Francis, can
Hello?
you hear you?
I'm on mute. Yes, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can
Hi,
hear
Francis. We can hear you.
Hi, Jide.
Hi.
Okay, I have several questions, but I'll limit myself to two right now. The first is, I know it's a trite question, analog or digital, which one do you prefer? And I say this half in jest because being a stereo person myself, or I used to be, very interested in stereos and believing whatnot. And for a long time we used to say, well, which one was better, playing vinyl records or CDs at the time. And I think when I stopped listening to that artificial divide, the word was, well, there was some said that CDs were definitely, digital music was definitely an improvement over analog, not least of all because of the convenience. And some said that there were some ranges of hearing that digital couldn't pick up, but analog could. And so analog was warmer, so there were some things, like a dog whistle, which couldn't be picked up by digital. So I wonder if there's a similar divide in photography, if there is something out there that still makes analog better than digital, or if that is just folks like me that are pining for the older days. The other question is Ovation, the likes of Ovation, for instance, which are social magazines, that's the way I understand it. Their magazines just with photographs. And what do you think of those? Is there, how do you think that will go forward?
Okay. I think that, I think you answered your first question quite eloquently. You're right. I actually have been going through, some stuff that I've had stored away for years and years and years, and I'm going through them and discovering things. And I've got a whole pile of vinyl records, which I've been listening to for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's given me a different kind of sort of like appreciation of listening to the same music. I can't say which I think is better. I know that in the world today, the convenience of digital work is fantastic. I think it's fantastic that digital work has allowed many, many more people's visions to be seen that were obstructed by just the mechanics of analog photography. And as I say, it works. So, and then, sorry, the second one was what?
Francis?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, now. The second one was Ovation magazine. What do you think of the likes of Ovation, which are just magazines about photographs?
I think that Ovation magazine, and I think what gave birth to Ovation magazine was the success of the pages in this day, I think on a Thursday or Tuesday, something where they used to photograph parties and everything, and then they, took it to a big 11-hole magazine, just pictures of people. I think that they are fantastic, and I don't like them. I mean, I'm not really, the vanity that is driven and the forces I don't like personally, but I think that it's fantastic because it is creating a collaborative record of this time in a way that one day will be amazing. And so the people who do it, the people who go out regularly, do this, they are doing a service to the future understanding of who we are. And even if it's that people will look back one day and see that incompetent people got relevance by being at parties every week, and their face was always there, and you can see the person could do nothing but that's how that tells us something about the society. So I think all of these different types of work have their place. They're very, very important. And it's only if I look only to the length of my nose that I will look and say, no, what's the point of this? It is very important work, and I like the fact that it's being done.
Thank you for that honest answer. So I think we'll soon begin to wind up and wrap up the curtain. We want to really appreciate you and everyone who has come over for this session. It's been more than a conversation. It's been more than a conversation, and we really, really appreciate you. So, but before we let you go on this note, I want to ask a question. Like, you've been around for such a long time documenting. How have you stayed true to your purpose? There are many things that could have influenced your biases, because we know almost all of us have our biases. We have things that we are biased towards. But for you who have stayed so long, documenting, creating images, telling stories of events and people, how have you managed your biases that it doesn't affect the understanding that you seek to get from the subject? How have you done this?
I think that perhaps it's because I'm always striving to do what I like to do. I think I've not done what I hope I can do. So I have to, I keep feeling, well, the next time, the next thing, I'm going to do this. But this also changes all the time. There's a photographer. There was a photographer called W. Eugene Smith. Yeah. He is an American documentary photographer. And I really was, impressed by his, even though in his case, often it was to his own detriment, but his single-minded commitment to long-term stories, to doing work in a particular way. And that kind of commitment that makes you resolve. You couldn't get this in 2 days. You have to really be committed to something to be able to do this. He had put his book Minamata, which is of the mercury poisoning in Japan. I just think is a phenomenal work of documentation. But I think it's important to note that one of his most important pictures, the major picture in the Minamata show, which was of a young girl who had been deformed by the mercury poisoning, being bathed by her mother. After the show debuted in Tokyo, the mother decided she didn't want that picture in the show. It was the centerpiece of the show, and it was taken out. But of course, it's in many books and many, it was one of the most powerful images I ever saw. But I think that the totality of the work loses nothing by that image being taken out. And I think that when you talk about, people are asked about, oh, can I use this? It's possible that without a full understanding of the repercussions, even social repercussions, they may say yes and then change their minds later and say no. And it's important when people talk about, making people understand what you're going to do and because I don't think there's a single image that is worth losing whatever you feel is unless your purpose is just, our images that are going to make me a star, then you forget about other people and you push ahead in that way. Now, I talk about this because Eugene Smith, when I early on reading about him, I came across a book he had made, which was called "Let Truth Be the Prejudice," and that really, I thought was very, very, at the time, my age at that time, I found it very profound, because I felt that yes, this business of complete impartiality. I mean, I'm not impartial to tribalism. I'm not impartial. I have a prejudice about that. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's good. So I wouldn't set out to do work that is balanced, that's impartial. So, but he says, let truth be your prejudice. The problem with that is my truth, if I'm being as honest as I can, may be different from somebody else's. So all I can ask is that my honesty be my prejudice, that I come across something that's awkward for me, but I can see its awkwardness for somebody else, and I don't push my own above. So I don't know if that addresses, you said, how do you keep on with that's what I think, because I think, yeah, okay.
It does. Somebody has a question among the audience. Luca finally has a question. So, Luca, the floor is open. You could ask the question now. Are you still there? Luca? Levy, are you there? Okay, fine. Yes. Levy, you can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, sir.
Morning,
sir. I always say it's really a great honor and privilege listening to you and having a master class like this for free.
I've lost him.
Yeah, he's back. Yeah. Luke, Levy, are you there?
So I really appreciate. So, okay, sir. So my question, sir, is, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my question, sir, is, what's your view on street photography and documentary photography in Nigeria? Because most times, like, is that people think they are the same. Like, street photographers, successful documentary photographers in Nigeria will tell you that street photographers are throwing their work to the internet, which in outside country, that's the same way things are done. And they will discourage you that you are throwing your work to the internet, that everyone's supposed to have a board, like there should be a project. I don't know if you're getting, there should be a project. Whereas that there's a difference between a street photographer and a documentary photographer. So, and it's always frustrating and depressing, because someone will tell you, you are asking someone for an advice, and he will tell you that you are throwing your work there, that you like that feeling that everybody should be a documentary. Like, I don't know if you understand me, sir.
Yes, I think I do.
Okay.
So what I would say is that when somebody comes and gives you, see, people have asked me many times about work. And before I can answer what I think about your work, I usually ask, what is it you're trying to do? What is your intention? What do you want? Now, if your intention is to build up some kind of body of work, and you want it to surprise a picture editor, they've never seen anything like this before, and they're going to want to use you, then I think it's probably good advice to say, oh, don't put it out on the internet, put together your body of work, and but it depends on what you want to do. You know, the more I hear, this is not how it's supposed to be. There's no way it's supposed to be. It depends on what you want. So you have to, the question, before you even go and ask somebody for advice, you question yourself. What is it that I want? And from that point of view, the value of advice is that everybody, especially even me, everybody gives advice from where they've come from. And but where they've come from and where they're going may not be the same as you. So those are things you can't, it doesn't do you, it doesn't really serve you to hear something that is making you feel, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. Depending on what your goal is, you may be doing the exact right thing. I did some work once for an NGO in education, work in education, and then they decided, it's costing too much money to be asking a photographer, because they wanted to document the program as it went on. They're costing too much money to get a photographer to come and do this each time. So, but what we can do is we'll get some of our people and you give them classes, and then they will be able to go off and continue doing the documentation as it's going on. So I said, okay. And so the people came, and the man who was the organizer of the whole thing was, I know, very, very dissatisfied with the outcome. And it was based on, after we'd gone through the end, it was 2 days, half of the time the guys were checking email on their laptops, you know, and it's like, these were people who are not interested in what you want them to do or what you want them to learn. And so they will not be very good at it because they weren't interested. But at the end of the 2 days, now having sussed that out, he says, well, okay, to guide us going forward, what's a good photograph? And this is, I think, was the source of his disappointment, because I said to him, well, I think a good photograph is a photograph that achieves the aim that you have for it. And I said, for example, now we're standing here and we see this overhead bridge, and there are people walking under it and there are cars walking under it. And somebody wants to make a case for building more overhead bridges. So what's a good photograph of that? If I tell you freezing the action, letting people see everything clearly, is a good photograph, surely it's a far better photograph if you have a longish shutter speed and you can see the blur of cars moving and somebody standing by, and you can understand the danger of that not being there. So it is a question that I find, you know, difficult to get my head around, when somebody will come to you and tell you, oh no, this is what, and these differentiations, I just said, in my opinion, the man who's doing the pictures for Ovation is doing documentary work. It becomes ridiculous to say, no, he's doing special photography. I'm doing that because I do it like this, it makes it, all of these demarcations, if they help you in the sense that you look at what people have done in this way and it helps you, guide you in the way you organize, all well and good, it's fantastic. But don't let it be something that holds you back, makes you feel you're doing the wrong thing, makes you, so that's my answer.
Thank you very much.
I hope it's okay.
Trying to take in all the stuff you've taken.
Yeah.
The way you have answered the questions have been really, really, I was expecting straight answers, but this is set me on a path to think.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I hope it's not gonna answer I've been giving you.
No.
This man couldn't give a straight answer all day.
No, that's not what I mean.
I'm teasing you. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Thank you.
Yeah. It's forcing me to think about my own work and what direction I'm taking. And
that's all we can do is think. The more we think about what we're doing, and why am I doing this? What am I trying to achieve? Sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you
go ahead.
Feel free. That's why it's a conversation. Feel free.
I'm done, yeah. Go on.
Okay. So basically to rethink my approach and maybe just basically question myself why I'm doing what I'm doing and where I should be headed. Because for instance, in trying to answer this question, he said, some say he's throwing away his photograph when he put them online, but at the same time, he's trying to get an audience.
He's trying to be visible.
Yeah, he's trying to be visible at the same time. So one might see it as wrong, but it sets a purpose on the other side. So maybe just figuring it out and trusting your instincts and lean on some guidance, taking some and training some away, and then just move on. That's how I am beginning to see it.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. Talking about your intention. What were your intentions? We have two people are raising up their hands, so we'll take Sadiq first. Sadiq, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? Sadiq?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So my question is very direct. In 2011, I joined the Punch newspaper in 11 as a photographer after my School of Journalism program. So it dawned on me that every other young guy like me then in 2011 who after university and all of that, they wanted to pursue a career in journalism. They don't want to work in the newsroom. So for me, I joined the newsroom. I wanted to understand the tenets of the Nigerian journalism space, how it works in Nigeria, because I've not, my dad retired at NTA, so I don't have the experience of how the newsroom look like, how it feels, how people think, all the noise and all of that. So when I joined Punch in 2011, I was into all those arguments about what pictures should make the front cover, what pictures should make the pseudo cover, all of that. So I want to ask all my other colleagues were like, no, I'm going to work as an NGO photographer. I'm going to work with social agency photographer, all of that. They were at some point feel like, okay, you are going to be caged in the newsroom. They are going to tell you what to do. They are going to do all of that. All the same, I had my own fair share of experience. At the same time, I learned a lot. My question to you is this: at what point did you know that you should leave the Nigerian newspaper to explore more and do more, so that your time in the newspaper industry won't be wasted or limited to the kind of work they ask you to do? At what point did you start exploring other options? At what point, and what triggered that thought?
Okay, well, I didn't start off my career working for newspapers. So what happened was that when the Guardian was being, the African Guardian magazine was being started, the people who were starting it asked me if I would could join them as the picture editor for me also to take photographs as well. But I didn't, it was never, I didn't join that and then leave it for something else. I worked there for a period of time, and then I just went on to on the sort of path of self-discovery that I was on all along. I thought that working in newspaper was excellent because you work under some degrees of pressure, because even if you're doing a long-term assignment or a long-term project of your own, there will be instances where you're photographing something that requires the kind of reflexes, the kind of speed of working that you often get experience in working on a newspaper. But I think that one of the main things is to keep is when somebody goes and works in a law firm and they start, and everybody complains, everybody who does, oh, they're not paying me enough, they're not paying me enough. Look at all of this work, they're not paying me enough. I think the important thing to realize is, well, what is your own trajectory? And realize that every bit of hard work and difficulty that you're going through now is preparing you for the next stage in what you want to do. So I think the punch experience will obviously be beneficial to the work you're doing now. I worked many years ago in the Ministry of Information. That was the first job I did when I came. When I returned to Nigeria, I worked for a year in the Ministry of Information, and I remember I was assigned with somebody else to go off and photograph the Argungun Fishing Festival. And we had already, were well down our slippery slope where we're given this assignment. The best thing that we can do, let's tell them we're going to fly to Sokoto, then maybe we can take a night bus, then we'll just get somebody to give us a ticket, so we'll keep the money, that's the difference of that. We'll do all kinds of different ways in which, how can we get ahead of this system? We're not paid enough. And then we go, we take the difference, how much we don't have to retire. And luckily, the guy I was going with was younger than me. And so, although he had been working there much longer than I had, and I told him that, you know what, first of all, if we are given all the money we need to go and come back with the security and comfort that we need, we're going to do that, because I'm not going to put cameras and things on a night bus when we're going to just fly to Sokoto. And I said, but what I am also going to do, I'm working here. I find myself exposed to situations that I would never, or it would be very, very difficult for me to be exposed to. So my suggestion was, bring along your own camera with your own film, as opposed to the stuff you're doing, and photograph for yourself. Now, this was just like, what kind of nonsense is this guy? I mean, this is the way we do it. Maybe because he's been able to get on, he's more comfortable than I am. That's why he's talking. So it was all kinds of bad blood. And anyway, we went and came back. As it happened, there was a lot of publicity about the Argungun Fishing Festival, just write-ups in the newspaper. And so the next year's festival, I don't know if it was Star Beer or Gold, somebody decided they were going to sponsor part of the next year's festival. And they were scouting around advertising agencies for images from the festival. We had been sent with black and white film to go and shoot. I shot for myself, color transparencies, and I got more than 2 years of my salary in the ministry from selling transparencies to advertising agencies. So I think the idea is just to keep an eye on what you're doing there. I mean, and the interesting thing is that the main issues I was, photographing for the ministry, and the main things that the ministry would need, I got all of them, and I didn't get any of them for myself. So the stuff that I got for myself was really peripheral stuff, but it was stuff that added value to what was going on. And the agency were just over the moon and doling out money in a way that I had never, I hadn't thought that I would get as much as I did from that. So that's, yeah.
That's wisdom.
I've gone a long way around your punch newspaper.
That's wisdom. Really, really, really wise counsel. And Bernard gave that advice. Bernard Kalu, some years ago, the first time we met him when he came to Benin, he says, whatever you feel like, whatever you see that you got interested in and you want to photograph. Don't wait, photograph it. That whatever story that comes to your mind, whatever image comes to your eyes, whatever you see that you are drawn towards. Say, don't ever make the mistake to keep your camera, photograph it, and just keep it. You don't know when it's going to be useful for you. And
there's one comment that I'd make, because you guys are, they're based in Benin. And as we said the other day, for me, there's a sort of rich tradition, half of which has not even been uncovered yet, of photography in Benin. And as I was telling you, there's Pa Alonge, who got some notoriety because the Smithsonian made a book on his work. But as it happened, a few years before his death, I met him and did a little interview with him. And he told me that when he started off as a young photographer, the Oba of Benin liked him and exposed him to, he gave him the run of the palace. You can go and photograph what you like. And then when the Oba died, his successor found this guy an irritant. And he ended up saying that Pa Alonge was not allowed in. Everywhere you turn, this guy is there. No, why are you turning? Why are you for? So he was barred, he said, barred from the palace. And several years, 3-4 years later, there was some kind of ceremony, something that was going to be done, which had not been done for many years. And there were many people who said, and people there said, there were certain things about it they were not sure of. And somebody said, well, what of that guy who used to take pictures here? And he said they sent for him and were very, very happy that he had images of aspects of this ceremony. And he got the run of the palace again. So it's also important to know that what happens right this minute is not the end of the story. So you don't mind those people. After all this thing I've been doing, I'm documenting, and I will even throw away all this, forget about them. You don't know, So Benin maybe can have a resurgence, a rebirth. And as we were saying the other day, Pa Alonge was okay, I was saying when you talk about what's going on here as opposed to elsewhere, Pa Alonge donated his work to Mary Kaplan, who was a researcher who had come researching photography in West Africa. And that work was given to the Smithsonian, who made a book about him. And I remember the people making the Smithsonian were over the moon about this discovery of a photographer who was doing this work at this time. He must have been head and shoulders above everybody else. Whereas the truth is, his access to the palace gave him images that other people didn't have. But the work he was doing was what many, many, many photographers were doing. That was the level of photography. I remember they were saying, gosh, he was hand coloring glass plate negatives. Well, many photographers were hand coloring glass plate negatives. And as Alonge said, he found that ladies had a steady hand, and he used to employ ladies to come and do the hand painting for him. People who already knew, because they were doing for other photographers. So we all exist within a continuum, and it is, and I'm thankful that we've had this opportunity, because it is building on the continuum that actually allows progress, rather than deciding, I'm the first one to do this, and so let me go and figure everything out. But I say that, but we're repeating that knowing what happened before should not hold you back, because things happened that were, I understand that happened, but sometimes a door that seems can never open, you just blow by and the wind opens it and you walk to say, was there ever anything stopping you? So never be held back by somebody else's negative experiences. You got plenty of your own that you will find along the way that you will use to help the next person. Okay.
Thank you. So last question is coming from Kenneth Ewulu. Can you ask your question, sir?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. Mr. Adeniyi-Jones, I've been privileged to have...
Mr. Kenneth Ewulu.
Yeah, I've been privileged to have crossed paths with you through the years. And I see you as a senior brother, a senior colleague. And something
I beg you, Kenneth, with all this gray hair, don't call me your senior brother. You can call me Aburo.
Okay, Aburo. All right. Okay, so basically, my question or my observation has been that I've noticed that you have adjusted and adapted to changing technology, changing perspectives through the years. And that's something I observed as your brother coming along, that you had this learning spirit. You always had an open mind to see what good could be around this new technology, this new development, this new way of doing things. So my question here is, how have you managed to stay at the cusp of high-level productivity, quality work, maintaining your contacts and being relevant, of course, as decision makers change from generation to generation? You've had to make new friends, make new alliances, keep younger alliances going because you knew that sometime in the future there will be decision makers. How have you transitioned using your learning spirit to still stay at the cusp of the photographic work globally? How have you managed that?
Okay, thank you. I start off by saying, believe you me, I'm not at the cusp of anything. And I'll tell you this because these guys will tell you that, oh, Tony told them about me, then they went to go and look, and say, oh, so, you know, I don't think I exist at the cusp of anything. And the other day, yesterday, I was listening to talk about ethical photography, and somebody said, oh, they noticed that when photographers from such and such a place come in, they set their presets for a certain kind of image. And I don't know what a preset is. I mean, let me say I know, but I've never used anything like a preset. With the digital work I do, I try to bring it as close as I can to working in a dark room. So I can crop things, I can adjust the contrast, but I don't, I will tell you, I'm not at the cutting edge of all of this. And there are many sort of decision makers who, of course, for many reasons, I won't come to mind as somebody to do a particular kind of work, even though I do it and would love to do it, because there are many other people who are doing, as I said at the beginning, maybe I bring a perspective to things which may or may not be important for the person who's commissioning work today. So sure, I mean, I have tried to keep up with things in the sense that I never wanted to be sitting on the sidelines moaning and complaining about natural phenomena of growth. And I said, well, this is what I do, so I've got to try and keep my hand in. And of course, as that happens, you find, wow, new discoveries for yourself that, oh, wow, this works well. So yeah, I don't think I'm at the cusp of either the technology or the industry.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just another question, but I think we are run out of time. We've shot the timeline we have for today, but I don't think it's out of place. Someone is asking here, Smile, Ms. Olawoyi Smile, how do you market your work to the right client? And what is the future of documentary photography in Africa?
Commercial viability.
Let me just start with the second one, the future of documentary photography in Africa. If I had a way of figuring that out, I would use that for the pools, not for projecting documentary photography, and I would make lots and lots of money and relax. I can't see in the future. I don't know. I don't know the direction it will take, but I do know what it does. Well, what it does appear to me is that there will always be ways in which imagery is used, because imagery can convey things in a visceral way, in a way that people can respond when something it gets in your head and you can't get it out of your head, or the multiples of different kinds of things mold the way you look at things, so that you begin to think that this is wrong, this is unfair, oh, this is not right for this, because you've seen it and you've seen it again and you've seen it again. So I don't think that there's danger. I remember the Victoria and Albert Museum having I think in the 70s, an exhibition saying the birth of photography, painting is dead. And so clearly that didn't happen, just like I don't think you should worry if the ways in which people can eke out a living. And there are many people who do something else, who maybe have a really, really successful wedding business that pays them, or advertising business, and then they find ways in which they can pursue what they want in as far as in everything you come across all the time, you have the opportunity to document. And it's when you look back, you begin to see the connections. And it works when you are honest with yourself about what you're seeing and what you respond to. And so you're not going out with a formula, okay, to document, I have to do this. This is just documenting things over a long term that will have a different kind of relevance later on in life.
Thank you so much. I don't know how we're going to do this, but this is to Kayode, Olua, and Ebun Akimbo have questions. So I will just ask that Kayode, just
I'll be
your
very
question.
quick.
You'll be quick.
And then, my answer.
Yeah, fine too. Tammy, I think your question has been answered. Tamani, sorry about that. The first one is skipped, but I think it was attended to. That's why we didn't call on that. So, Ebu and Kayode, please just say your questions so Babajide can answer them together. So we'll take Kayode first, okay. Then we'll take Ebu.
Okay. Good afternoon, Babajide.
Good afternoon.
Sorry, good morning. It's morning in Nigeria. Good morning.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for your encouragement always. For always trying to put me right on the path. I have two questions, actually. Question one is, what influences your position on your narratives? And second question is, how do you strike a balance when you have a commissioned job and your narrative is trying to be controlled? How do you strike a balance in between that line?
Thank you.
Okay.
Babajide, just note that down, please. So let's take Ebun's question too. Ebu, you are up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Jide.
Good afternoon.
My question is, so there's this thing about the work, the artist getting the accolades for the work he or she does, and then say the community where the work is done or the subject, really gets less accolades. So like how especially in our community, in our country, how do we begin to strike that balance where the subject, the community, begins to get the accolades as well, begins to get the rewards as well of doing the work being produced?
Thank you.
Okay, if just speak to Eben's question first. When you say accolades, accolades, do you mean that the photographer gets paid for his work and the community doesn't get anything? Is that what you meant?
Okay, no, not necessarily payment. So like the photographer gets.
Well, okay, let me go on. Maybe she'll come back towards the end.
I'm here.
Photographer gets.
Okay, so the photographer gets the award. So let me paint a scenario. So I go to, let's say, shoot in Northeast.
Can you hear us? The line is breaking. We're struggling to hear what you're saying now, sir. Can you?
Well, let me just see. Just say, I think that within the if I understood her correctly, the awards, the accolades, whatever it is, that's what a photographer will get as part of the business. And if I don't know that, I don't know what that actually means to the person who receives it. I don't know what it means to the photographer, beyond the fact that we have a structure that will reward them in terms of they get better known, and they maybe get other jobs for it. And that will happen if they've done their work well. I did some work with a community in Kaduna many years ago that were completely dispossessed, and they had and they were hoping that they were disabled people, beggars, and they were hoping that if it came to the notice of everybody that their situation, the government would be forced to do something about their situation. So when I was taken to go and meet them, I spent 4 days with them. But I began by saying, I have no certainty that this will affect anything. I said, all I can do is I can present it. I can present as best I can your situation for people to see. And then it goes beyond me. And the most difficult thing about that was that it got to a newspaper, and there was a photograph I had taken of some children playing in the charred remains of what used to be their homes. And I had written a text, and the editor of the paper changed my text and wrote, children playing oblivious of the realities of life. And so luckily, I was shown that before it went to press, and I was furious, and everybody misunderstood and thought that I was objecting to my writing being edited. My writing must be edited for what's going on, but you cannot change the meaning, and you don't know, you sit somewhere in Lagos deciding what kids know about the reality of life, children who have lived more of the reality than you will till your dying day. And so, yeah, so anyway, I don't know, I went a little bit off the track. And the conflict between your position, the narrative you, well, if you have a client, and what they're asking you to do conflicts fundamentally with what you feel about what you're doing, then I think your first responsibility is to raise it and to put forward your point of view. And then it will depend on how much the two of them are at variance with each other. I did some work for my last example, and I'll keep my mouth shut. I did some work for a long-term assignment with some people on some pilot projects on education in Nigeria. And one of them, the ones that were going on in northern Nigeria, they said that the children in the Almajiri schools were not getting Western education. So therefore, they were going to talk to the the imams and see, well, the children go to these schools. Can we get some teachers to go and teach? And what they meant by Western education was to teach sciences, math, and sort of like that in the schools. So I happened to be in one of the meetings where this was being discussed, and then they wanted, examples to show what it would be like, and then they want somebody dressed in a sort of like a tie, a teacher from somewhere going into these, and I felt that this was fundamentally flawed. Firstly, because it emanates from a wrong position that your Islamic school, your faith, is tied to something inferior to what the people who know and the Western education is bringing you. Yeah. And so I said, well, I object to this approach. Firstly, because education is for humanity. Secondly, what you call Western education was pioneer. So if you approach these people and say, our joint heritage, the people who discovered algebra, who mapped the skies, all worshipped in the same way you do, embrace it. This is a completely different idea than saying ours is better and we want to force our own over so that you can make progress. And that would color the way you approach it. So I think that, when your narrative is different from something that somebody's asking you to do, you have to, I think, engage them. And if they think, oh, well, yes, then fine. And if they think, no, from above, there's the way they want to do it, then the choice is for you, well, am I the one who's going to do this or not?
Thank you so much, Uncle Jide. Guys, I think we can't take any more questions at this time. We've taken too much time of Uncle Jide's day, but we are truly, truly grateful for the time you spent to share with us part of your experience from your journey and for us to learn from you. We are truly, 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 truly grateful. And we don't take this for granted. Guys, also want to thank you all for joining, spending time with us to learn from one of us who is doing excellent work. And we don't take it for granted too. We appreciate you guys. So Edgar, have anything to say?
Thank you for your time. So yeah, really glad to see that.
Thank you.
We could discuss in this direction and not talk about technicals and all the many things we are used to. Hopefully shaping the way we want to go. We're really grateful for everyone who has come up. Yeah. Thank you, Uncle Jide, once more.
Thank you so much. So, we also look forward to a book from you about your work.
Okay.
Yes, we want to see a book from you about your work. Those archives, the images you have in your archives, we want to see them in a book. And we know you are an excellent writer too. So we want to see more of your readings. These things you share with us today, I wonder how it would be in a book that people could read it and make reference to some of them for their work and for the future, even people beyond us. So we're looking forward to your book. We actually want to see your book. We want to see your book. We are really grateful. We don't know how best to say it, but thank you so much. Thank you, really. Thank you so much. So we'll stay in touch, Uncle. We have a gift we'll send to you from us. One of these t-shirts would come to you. We would find a way to parcel it and send it to you in coming days. So from us at Tell That Story and for everyone who joined, we want to say thank you and God bless you. Any last words for anyone, Uncle Jide, if I call you Dr. Jide? Hello, Uncle Jide, are you there? Hello, Uncle Jide, are you there?
Hello, Uncle Jide.
Oh.
Thank you. Very generous of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, bye. So we'll call on the program. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, everyone. God bless you guys.
Okay. Okay.
Cheers. Cheers, Uncle. Thank you. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Okay. All right.
Bye, sir.
Well done.
Nice to see you again.
Bye.
Thanks.